Hey, this is episode 2 of the She Has a Name series. You're going to love it, but you'll really get the most out of it if you listen to episode 1 first. So if you haven't already, I highly recommend that you go back before continuing. Also, a heads up, we talk about some heavy topics, including murder and other acts of violence. Listener discretion is advised. When my nephew Antonio called me that day in May of 2004 and revealed that he was the son of a sister I never knew about, he unlocked a memory, a childhood fantasy. Growing up, I lived in an imaginary world. I mean, full-on motion picture movies in my head of what I wanted my life to be in the future and in the present. Lifestyles of the rich and famous type fantasies. And sometimes those made-up stories would make their way into real life. In elementary school, maybe around 3rd or 4th grade, I made up a story that I had a big sister. I would describe to my classmates what she looked like. Caramel complexion with a beautiful bouncy bob like Janet Jackson when she guest starred on Different Strokes. Now, this wasn't unusual. I mean, kids can have pretty active imaginations, but I'd later learn through a little therapy and self-help books that my behavior was also a sign of classic disassociation. Sometimes it was just easier to disconnect, to live in a make-believe world rather than real life. And it feels cliche to say this, but at times growing up in the 80s and 90s in Detroit felt like living in a war zone. The local news had me thinking that at every turn, me or someone I loved was going to get killed or brutalized. And when those things actually happened to us, my fantasy world felt like the safest place to be. I also was a nerd and I felt misunderstood. I just looked so different from everyone else in my family. All of my cousins could trace their features to both their parents. They grew up knowing their fathers. So telling people that I had a sister who was beautiful, successful, popular, and loved me, well, even if it wasn't true, to tell it felt like affirmation. That it wasn't always going to be this way for me. But I had a future. Just look at my fictitious big sis. I was so committed to this make-believe person that I even gave her a name. A name that everyone who was beautiful and strong seemed to have back then. Like my favorite R&B star. I named her Anita.
It's just so prophetic how it was true the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah. To me, that's the real story about it all. So what you thought you were imagining was actually real.
Who was the real Anita outside of my imagination? And how could she end up buried for 3 decades as a Jane Doe? I'm Tonya Mosley, and you're listening to She Has a Name. We begin our journey going back in time to the years leading up to Anita's disappearance, putting together the pieces of her short life to help us understand what could have led to her murder, and the secrets her son Antonio left for me to figure out. This is episode 2, Natural Born Hustler. Up until recently, everything I knew about my sister Anita, I learned from Antonio.
I know she would wear, like when she would wear stockings, like I would have to go buy these stockings for her. And like it was like a particular color. I can't even remember what it was, but it was like a shade of brown.
A son basking in the glow of the first woman he ever loved. Intimate details, like the sound of her laugh, the way she styled her hair, the preferred color of her stockings.
I remember I got brown one time, and she was like, nah.
Wrong brown, yeah.
Yeah, so it was kind of like a very specific hue.
During our conversations over the last 20 years, Antonio has shared these small, beautiful details, pieces of Anita for me to hold on to. And without fail, at some point, his wistful reminiscing always turns to disbelief. Like he's forgotten for a brief second that the nightmare he's been living since he was 14 is real.
She's told me to, never give up. And I don't know, sometimes I want to, but just can't.
Antonio's view of his mom is from the vantage point of a child, beautiful but incomplete. And over time, his incomplete memories have also felt to me like maybe he was protecting or even hiding something. Once we decided to tell Anita's story through this podcast, we had to talk through exactly who to talk to. And it took me months to get Antonio to introduce me to people who knew her. His hesitance, he says, was him actually trying to protect me. Because for years, he'd been on the same journey I'm on now, trying to get family and friends to tell what they know.
I had to grow into this in some respect. So me showing up with these questions, some people didn't like that.
Going down memory lane with people, I'd experienced what he's talking about. The media has ignored, mischaracterized, or simplified for so long the stories of people whose lives don't fit neatly into a pretty little box with a perfect ending, a perfect bow on top. People with complex lives are just too hard to write about. So people were suspicious of my motives. I had to convince them that I wasn't just looking for a soundbite to fit a larger narrative. It took a while, but once I got Antonio to share the names and numbers of family and friends, the world of Anita began to come to life.
Okay, we're going to start from here. This is my mother and my father. And she's holding Antonio on her lap. That's why we took that picture. On that picture, yes. And this is
my producers and I drove the 3 hours from Detroit to Cleveland one day in the fall of 2023 to meet Valerie Smith, the sister Anita grew up with. As you remember, Anita and I have the same father, but different mothers. And neither of us had a typical father-daughter relationship with him. We'll talk about that in a later episode. So Anita was raised with her mother, Carlene, and her stepdad, Leo. And her sister, Valerie, is one of the few people still alive who can share vivid details about their childhood. From the moment she opened the doors to her home, it was clear that she's still got that Southern charm that many people from the D inherited from their parents and grandparents.
y'all all fresh and everything. I guess y'all used to be up early.
Valerie, or Val as she's called, told me right away that she said yes to meeting me because she was curious to see what I look like. I laughed because that made two of us. I wanted to look into her face too. We were both curious if we'd see Anita in each other.
I was more like the homie kind, and you didn't really have no friends, and she was outgoing and, know how to put on her makeup and a dresser. All of us are dressers, but she was a dresser. Stay sharp there every day. Matter of fact,
Val and Neat, as she calls Anita, were 3 years apart. And for our visit, she pulled out a treasure trove, mementos she'd unpacked from boxes, spread neatly across her dining room table, just for us.
These are pictures of her friends and who she was dating.
Anita's beautiful silk dresses and jumpsuits, now almost 40 years old, still in good shape.
She looks good.
I want to wear this now.
Great style.
Yeah, these are some of the dresses.
Oh, those are the dresses. Oh, my God.
Oh, I love the sequins.
Yeah, I'm gonna wear this one. And she loved boxing. Oh my gosh, I got some of her collections out of her photo album that I had. I pieced it together when I had. She loved boxing, and she was a writer. She kept a journal.
Anita was 29 years old when she was murdered in 1987. I was 9 years old, a long way away from knowing about her. I'd later learned that there were 3 major experiences that shaped her short life. The first happened in 1972, when Val was 11 and Anita was 14. Anita, she says, was the boss, always center stage.
Oh, yes. I mean, we was down in Rossin Springs. I remember one time my dad was at work. We was on the top of the pool table with the pool sticks. And she always had to be dining. You know what I'm saying? We was the Springs.
The Wileys lived a pretty typical Detroit life in the 70s. Val's father, Leo, Anita's stepdad, worked for Chrysler, which was considered a great job. Almost everyone's work back then was connected in some way to the automotive industry, which allowed people to live pretty well. More than half of Detroiters owned their homes back then. Valerie and Anita's mom, Carlene, cared for the house and the kids.
My father didn't really want her to work, but we were middle class. She made our clothes, we had new bikes, we had a beautiful childhood. It was Anita, and then myself, and then Gwendolyn, the baby sister, and Leo. That's the baby brother, he's the only boy.
One thing about Anita, Val says, is that from the time they were kids, she loved being out in the streets, hanging with friends and flirting with boys, like this guy who lived in the neighborhood named Stephen Williams, who they called Butch.
We met in junior high school. We started dating, and she was my first girlfriend. I think it was about 12.
Stephen moved from Detroit some years ago and now lives in Texas with his wife. It actually took me a while to catch up with him, too. We finally got on the phone together one Sunday morning while he was running errands, and as you can hear, he was in the car while we were talking. He told me that when I first called, he wasn't sure he wanted to talk about Anita. The memories I asked him to recount were things he hadn't thought about in a really long time. Difficult memories to trudge up, especially given what transpired years later. But once we got to talking, some of the good memories came flooding back.
What was she like?
Well, Anita was, she was crazy about me. I know that. She was headstrong. She was like a boss. You know, she had the boss attitude as little as she was.
Anita and Stephen were thick as thieves from about 6th to 8th grade. And at first, it was puppy love. They'd walk through their West Side neighborhood together, go out to eat, and at nightfall, as the parents were winding down and retreating into their own worlds, Anita and Stephen would sneak into each other's bedroom windows.
Butch used to sneak through the window all the time, and she would pay me. She would pay me to go in my other sister's room and not to say nothing. Yeah, I blackmailed her. I blackmailed her into letting me wear her clothes.
This went on for a while, until they couldn't keep it secret anymore.
One day, I come in from school. Neat was sitting there with my mother and my father. And then Butch came over. And then I heard them discussing that she was pregnant and everything like that. And, you know, they was upset, but my mother loved it. She was going to have a grandbaby. You know what I'm saying?
You were a really young father. Yeah.
Yeah, I was. My crew, I was the only father. Friends used to tease me. Say, you got to realize, she says, my nickname was Butch, so they say, Butch is a father, he got a kid.
This was the first major event in Anita's life. She and Stephen were now parents at 14 years old. And Anita, as he remembers it, was so much more mature than he was.
She running around with older people. You know, they got cars and riding around the Eldorados, you know, all that stuff. You know, I'm still riding a bicycle. So that's when we started drifting apart then. You know, she was off into her own little world. And then I'm trying to find my way. We still come together when, if I want to see the kid.
The kid was Antonio. Born in 1972, another addition to the Wiley household. Val moved out of the room she shared with Anita, allowing her and Antonio to have it for themselves. And Antonio remembers those early years of his life as good ones, playing games and dancing to Stevie Wonder's Key of Life in the living room, his mother guiding his steps.
And she would want to like social dance, which is kind of like ballroom dancing or something like that. And I didn't know the steps. So she would like let me stand on her feet, kind of twirl me around and show me the moves and how to hold her and, you know, how to be held. It was awesome. So yeah, that's definitely one of my favorite memories. Yeah.
Those were good days. But soon, all of Antonio's favorite memories would be clouded by one tragic event after another. During the first few years of Antonio's life in the mid-70s, things were good. His grandparents' home felt safe and full of love. Some nights he'd snuggle on the couch with his grandma Carlene to watch her favorite TV show, the popular crime series Kojak, starring Telly Savalas.
My grandmother was kind of my mom, if I guess you could say, village, you know, up to that point. But once she passed...
Yeah, you know, after, you know, things happen so quick, you know what I'm saying? After my mother died, it was just a whole different world.
As Valerie remembers it, one day their mother, Carlene, got sick all of a sudden. She went to the hospital to get checked out, and everyone expected her to be back home in no time. But she never returned. Anita and Val's mom died in the hospital at 32 years old. This is the second major event in Anita's life. It was only 5 years ago that Val learned from her younger brother that their mom had cancer.
He said she didn't want none of the girls to know, but she told him as the only boy, the only son.
After their mother's wake and funeral, after the rush of condolences, Anita, Val, and the kids returned home. But their father, Leo, didn't return with them. He literally never came back, leaving Anita at 17 years old as the head of the household.
I think that was the first time I tried to commit suicide. And she was there. She was there at the hospital because I blacked out, you know, woke up at the hospital. She was there. She had on my mother's coat, you know. She always wore my mother's coat. That was the only thing that we really had left after the funeral.
Anita was wearing her mother's coat, and also the responsibility of caring for 3 siblings and a 3-year-old son by herself. And for a while they survived by eating food their late mother had cooked and kept in a deep freezer.
So the funny part about that, I guess, is they tried to cook it and come to find out it was already prepped. My grandmother had already cooked it. So they was trying to figure out why it was turning out so horrible. Only to realize Granny was forethoughtful, you know, she'd already cooked the food, froze it, and it was already prepared for them.
Val's memory of dates and time periods is fuzzy. It's what happens when we recall events from a long time ago, especially painful ones. But this one she'll never forget. It was around 1975, 49 years ago. The ache of it all still sits close to the surface.
My dad never came home. And we lived in that house for years, a couple of years. And thank God Anita was so advanced. Know the streets, knew about drugs, and she knew good people. Even though they were drug dealers, they were good people, and they took care of her.
Now, knowing drug dealers wasn't out of the ordinary for the Wileys. Yes, they were a typical middle-class family from Detroit, but Val describes her mother's side as people who also made their living underground. Anita, at 17, was living a very adult life. She was no longer in school, and she got a job working as a barmaid at a place called the Paramount Lounge. And the drug dealers, Val says, helped Anita supplement her income, helped her keep the lights and the heat on, allowed her to buy food and clothing for the kids. And soon, Anita would learn how to make her own money in this world, how to deal drugs herself. Now, sometime after Anita's stepdad, Leo, left the family, he met a young woman named Linda, who had recently moved to Detroit from Georgia.
I went from living in a small town, going to school, going to church, going home, to being here in a big city, not knowing people, not knowing which way to go. And yeah, it was different.
Within a year of meeting each other, Linda married Anita's stepdad, Leo. And it was only then that Linda discovered that he had abandoned his kids, leaving Anita to care for them.
So the challenge was, I was 24, he was 36, Anita was 18, the other kids were like 12, 14, in that area. My husband, he wasn't a strong person, so he left them in the house with Anita to go and stay with somebody else. That was how he coped. He and I met in the middle of all that. And I think he more or less latched on to me because he felt like I would be able to help them. But I couldn't really help them because they were already set on course as to what they felt about anybody.
Linda remained together with Leo until his death in 2016. We initially called her because she's known in the family as the keeper of home videos and photo albums. So Antonio said she'd definitely have snapshots of Anita. But like with so much of Detroit history, all of the tapes and photos that she owned were destroyed a few years ago when her basement flooded. What she did provide were memories of Anita, potent, disturbing accounts of a young woman who was deep into things Linda, a young girl from Georgia, had no concept of.
Well, at 18, there's not a lot of parenting you can do. So they watched her do what she did, sell drugs, had different people in and out of the house, and it was a mess. And I didn't know how much of a mess it was until I got up in it.
Now, they were entering the 80s, and crack cocaine was making its way into every major city, including Detroit. It looked like an easy option in those early days to make fast money. There were distributors and street corner salesmen and runners. Anita was a quick study.
You know, we started dealing drugs. I knew about the green bag, the white bag, you know what I'm saying, color-coded it, you know what I'm saying? But we end up paying the bills, able to eat, and everything like that, you know.
Leo and Linda had an announcement to make. They were moving back into the house. And from the very start, Anita and Linda were fighting. I can imagine Anita was thinking, who is this woman showing up like this, not only talking about moving in, but laying down rules?
Keep your room clean, have your clothes up, come in, do your homework, and then go back outside, stuff like that. And they weren't accustomed to doing that, so it was hard for them.
Everyone was so angry and hurt, full of pain, especially Anita.
They put her out. You got to go. You know what I'm saying? And I said, well, I tried to grab a knife. You know what I'm saying? So we were upset. How you going to come back after 2 years just walking the house you married? And you know what I'm saying?
After Linda and Leo kicked her out, Anita relied on the people who had been there for her, drug dealers. One dealer in particular actually got Anita her first apartment.
My God, he loved us. He took care of us. You know, he made sure we had food, whatever we needed.
And he looked after Val, too. hooking her up with his younger brother, Frank. Anita and Val were living lives way beyond their years, and they still needed people to watch over and care for them. Anita kept telling Val, Frank is a good man, even though he was 21, and Val was just 14.
He work at Chrysler, you know what I'm saying? Get that money, he will take care of you, you know what I'm saying? So, you know, first time he whispered, I'm gonna come back and see you, I ran upstairs to my bedroom, shut the door. That old man trying to talk to me. But we ended up getting together and everything. Best thing I could ever done.
Frank is now a reverend and a drug addiction counselor in Cleveland, a long way from his former life in Detroit. He and Val are now divorced, but they're still friends. She was there on speakerphone throughout our conversation with him. Frank says Anita was smart and cunning. She was really focused on making things work.
Well, she was always self-motivated. In other words, she was just a natural-born hustler. She had the gift of gab, and she just knew how to keep a conversation going and make it into a hustle, and she was very aggressive.
It was rare, but not out of the question for a woman to be a drug dealer back in the 80s. My friend Ira Todd, who used to be a Detroit narcotics detective, says that from his experience, women dealers could move in stealth mode and keep secrets.
A lot of times we would use a lot of them as our sources too, a lot of the women drug dealers, because they were smarter, you know, and you have fewer of them, but they were a lot smarter. Yeah. You know, we had this one guy that had, like, every time you saw him, you look for the two women in the car behind him. That's the car you shook down.
This is all new information for me. Antonio never told me about his mother's drug dealing. He let me find out on my own by talking to Val and Frank and Linda.
I'm wondering why you didn't tell me these really important things that I think that I should have known. They don't really matter in the big scheme of things, but they were just such big omissions that it almost feels like lies that you didn't tell me.
You know, I've heard a lot of things. I've seen a lot of things, right? But I don't, you know, like I don't know how to process that. You know what I'm saying? And I do know the 80s was a crazy time.
After 20 years of phone calls and visits, I was confused that he'd leave me to find out all of this information on my own. At the same time, I never asked for details beyond those beautiful memories he'd share with me. So part of me not knowing is on me. Maybe I felt like asking anything outside of what he wanted to share might feel like I was probing, like an invasion. It was clear that he was already in so much pain. And maybe Antonio felt like I wouldn't care as much about the story if I knew. And he has a reason to believe that, because how many times have you seen a drug dealer portrayed in a nuanced light? He says that's not true, but it does seem like after I found out and he saw that I wasn't going anywhere, a weight on his shoulders lifted. He's opening up, sharing details about his life with his mom, things she taught him, the things he saw.
And I just want to let you know that I'll never lie to you, A, and B, whatever you want to know, I'll tell you. You know, I have nothing to hide.
Next time on She Has a Name, Anita's short life was marked by 3 significant events: becoming a mother at 14, losing her own mother before her 18th birthday, and meeting a guy that everyone says was wrong for her.
None of us kind of liked him, but she loved him. So that was, when we're looking back now, that was the point of tension.
She was out there. She was selling drugs. She was with this guy that had control over her.
She was a little feisty thing. She was fighting the police. Can you imagine? She was fighting the police. Cutting him out. Like, be quiet, get in the car. Oh, she was feisty too. Like, wow, I'll never forget that shit. You know, certain things you just never forget.
She Has a Name is a TMI and APM Studios production. Our team includes executive producer Antonio Wiley, showrunner Nicole Hill, audio producer and sound designer Marie Mendoza, and research producer Kristen Fraser. Our music was composed by Andy Clausen, sound design and final mastering by Enrico Benjamin. APM's executive producer is Erica Kraus. Senior production manager is Nick Ryan. APM's executives in charge are Joanne Griffith and Chandra Kravati. I'm your host, creator, and executive producer, Tonya Mosley. A special thanks to Ira Todd, my admin, Rochelle Roberts, Melissa Kuipers at NPR West, and thank you to everyone willing to talk with us about this important story. This is for us.